When a modern man looks at the writings of an ancient natural philosopher or physician like Pliny or Hippocrates or Galen or Saint Hildegard, it's hard for us to understand the natural world in the way that these ancient and medieval men and women understood it. When we read their writings, it seems curious, it's interesting, but there seems to be a real disconnect between the way that they looked at the body and the natural world and all of the different substances in the natural world and the way that we look at them today. And this is especially true in modern society like American society, consumer society. And the reason why is because in modern society, we are so accustomed to making use of manufactured products that are very complex products. Everything we eat from the supermarket, every medicine we take from the pharmacy has lists of ingredients. It's a complex product, and we refer to it by a name that's just given to the compound, that's given to the product itself. If I have a headache, I may ask for a Tylenol. We don't even talk about the contents of the medication. We simply refer to the medicine or to the compound by name. Give me a Tylenol. We do the same thing with other kinds of medicines, allergy medications, headache and pain remedies. We may refer to a substance like acetaminophen or ibuprofen. And that's how we talk about medicines in modern society. Yet these are complex products. These are compound substances. And this is not how ancient people thought about the body or nutrition or medicines. The same thing's true with our foods. We may go to the store and buy a jar of spaghetti sauce, and it's got a list of ingredients on the back of the jar. We may buy the kids a box of cereal, and again, there's a list of ingredients on the box, all kinds of things added to it. And I'm not saying that they're bad. It's a compound product. And we just refer to it by a name. We just refer to Raisin Bran or some other product name, usually a name brand that's been marketed and we begin to use to refer to things. And so in modern society, we're eating and consuming all kinds of products, all kinds of substances that we're not even aware of because we're consuming these compound products. We really don't even think about the elementary contents of these different products. When we open up a book on natural philosophy or ancient medicine, we find a very different world. There are no supermarkets, there are no pharmacies, there are no name brand products, there are no compound products. There's no consumer society in the ancient world. And what we find is a generation or multiple generations where men and women dealt directly with simple substances. They dealt directly with fruits and vegetables and herbs. They dealt directly with these things. A second problem that we have in modern society is we consume so much. Not only do we consume these compound products, but we consume them in great quantity. And so we never have an idea of what's actually in our body at any time. It's just a crazy mixture of all different kinds of substances and products mingled together. And what's actually in our bodies at any given time is unknown to us. We don't know. I became aware of this as a kid, actually, because I lived, or I should say my grandmother lived with my family. And my grandmother was in poor health, and she had all kinds of physical problems. She was a diabetic, she smoked, she was overweight, she had back surgeries, all kinds of physical problems. She was always in and out of the doctors, in and out of surgeries. And so I was always hearing about her medications, what the doctor said she was supposed to eat, what she was supposed to do about her diabetes, about her smoking, all these different things. And I was close with my grandmother, and I would hear her talking about her different pills and medicines and all. And I would listen to nurses who visited, or even the doctors, talking about these substances. And I remember thinking that my grandmother is taking a multitude of these pills. She's eating all different foods throughout the day. She's smoking. All of these different things are going in her body. How can anyone have any idea what the final chemical formula is of what's going on inside of her? And I remember, because if you remember, I was starting out in school as a pre-med student, so I was very conscious of medical care and chemistry and things like that. I worked in a chemistry lab. But I remember thinking about my grandmother and watching these nurses and hearing these doctors make such a big fuss about these different chemicals and medications. And I thought, no one has any idea what's actually inside my grandmother's body in terms of what she's consumed and the mixture of substances that's present in her at any time. No one knows. And that was one of those things that made me lose hope in modern science and medicine, was just looking at it as a reasonable person who was conscious of how careful I had to work in the chemistry lab with substances, weighing out every different part of a mixture exactly, and then looking and thinking about medical care provided to people whose daily intake is a complete mystery to anyone, and realizing how impossible it would be for any doctor to pretend that he's got some kind of handle on what substances are present in any of his patients' bodies at any time. Now, looking back, I understand what the problem was, and it's what I'm talking about in this talk here. It's that we're so accustomed in this modern society of consuming such a great quantity of complex, unknown products that we really never know what's inside our bodies at any time, and we can't possibly identify any causes when something is wrong. And so what I'd like to talk about here is what we would need to do to get started with a study of ancient natural philosophy and medicine. Because it's a completely different way of life. It's a completely different way of looking at our bodies and nature, foods and medicines. And we really have to either commit to it completely or just forget about it. When we look at the ancient writers, we see them speaking of individual, simple substances. We've got to control our intake to the degree that we can talk about the individual substances that are present in our bodies, we can't continue this modern habit of consuming complex collections of substances that all are mixed up and scrambled within us at any given time, and then pretend that what we read in ancient natural philosophy or ancient medicine is going to make any sense. We have to control our consumption so that it's simple, so that we can actually understand what's inside of us and what the effects are of what's inside of us. For example, in scientific research, and again, I worked in chemistry and understand the simplicity of scientific research. In order to test the effects of any substance, we have to eliminate all variables. We have to control the circumstances so that everything is the same, I should say. We have to make sure that everything is the same except the one substance that we're testing, so that we can see the effect of that one substance. We can't have 3 substances changing at the same time, because then we won't know what the cause of the effect was. So we have to set up experiments that allow us to isolate a specific substance and observe its effects. And then we can substitute another substance for that substance and observe the effects and so on. We have to control the environment. We have to isolate the substance that we wish to test. And in our bodies, we need to be able to do the same thing. We need to be able to identify what the causes are of effects in our bodies. And the only way that we can do that is by maintaining a very simple diet. A simple diet that's composed of simple substances that we can observe. And if we introduce a new substance to our diet, we can isolate that substance and identify the effect or observe the effect that it has in us. And this is how the ancients looked at the body. The way that we eat and drink is not normal historically. And we have to become really conscious of that, because we have to change it. We have to learn to go back to simple foods. We have to go back to simple foods. We have to know exactly what we're eating day by day. We have to know what we can eat safely and what we eat that causes undesirable effects. We have to know these things. Because when we know that there's a certain diet consisting of certain ingredients, and that diet is good for us, and our bodies are healthy and happy on that diet with those ingredients, we can maintain that as our base diet. And then if we add something to it, we know exactly what has changed. And if any effects are produced, we can identify the cause, because our diet is simple. So for example, if I have a normal daily diet of bread and vegetables from the garden, and one day I introduce a new vegetable, and I notice that there's a change in my body, I can reasonably assert that that new vegetable that was introduced is likely the cause of that effect, because it's the only thing that changed. And so you can see, for us to be able to even think about our diet or medicine in a helpful way, we have to first be willing to establish strict control over what we eat and drink, so that we can know at all times what's inside of us. If we're willing to exercise that self-control, then we can begin to talk about different individual substances. And this is what we see in the ancient writers. Because before there was any of this talk about natural history or medicine, these plants and substances, there was already an understanding that fasting and temperance were necessary to health. And for many modern people, the first step that they need to take is to fast, is to begin fasting. They have to wean themselves off of all of these modern products. They have to wean themselves off of all of these modern habits and recommendations of this consumer culture, and go back to a simplicity of life that allows us to regain control of our bodies. We have to be willing to fast and begin introducing foods, simple foods, one by one, so that we know exactly what's being consumed, what's present in our body, and what its effects are. If we don't do that, we can't make use of this ancient natural history and medicine. We can't. Because when we read Pliny, for example, and we read about him talking about the benefits of garlic or of lettuce or cabbage or any of the different vegetables, it's assumed that there is a controlled environment in the human body where an individual substance can be introduced and its effect can be observed. And for most modern people, that simply is not possible, because there are so many variables every day because of the complex mixing and changing of daily foods, the contents of which are really unknown to the people consuming them. There's no way to even know, because there are 50 different substances introduced to the body, dozens of which may be new today. Even to use the same products, but from different stores or different brands, the substances going into our bodies are changing. And there's no way to analyze our health in the simple way that we see the ancient natural philosophers and physicians doing, when we're just filled with so many complex, constantly changing substances. We have to begin by fasting, by resetting our diet, as it were, by just going back to zero and restarting. We then have to work to introduce simple foods into our diet. For example, when my wife makes bread, I can ask my wife, "What's in the bread?" And she can tell me the 4 ingredients that are in our bread: wheat flour, salt, water, yeast, and whatever else may be in there. But it's a handful of simple substances at most, and we can know what's in our body. I can know that I had a glass of milk today. I can know that I had 2 glasses of water today. But when the diet is simple, when we're producing our own food and we know the ingredients and we intentionally seek out and use simple recipes, we can know exactly what's going on in our bodies And then we can benefit from these ancient works in natural history and medicine, because we can know that there's a specific problem, and we can go and look at what the ancients have to say about that problem, because they're talking about people who live in such a condition. And this is why modern people, when they read these ancient writings, they just can't understand them, because this isn't even how we eat or think of our bodies today. We're so careless. We just pour unknown substances into our bodies, and then when there are problems, we don't even know where to begin. There's no way to even begin diagnosing what the cause might be. And so we get into this modern, superstitious, crazy self-diagnosing when there's no controlled environment, there's no isolated causes, there's no real science in modern nutrition and medicine, for all the appearance, because we're not isolating substances and observing their effects. And in order for us to be able to manage our bodies in that way, which we can, which is how the ancients managed their bodies, we have to begin with fasting and then introduce simple foods and develop a simple, stable diet, all of the ingredients of which we're aware of at all times. And then, like I said, if we have a problem, we can identify what the cause of that problem may be, and we can introduce another substance that may remedy that problem. A good example of this is in our house this week. The kids and my wife started to develop symptoms of a cold. They were coughing, stuffy nose, pressure in their sinuses. And so we can see that something is developing in our bodies. It didn't affect me, but it affected my wife and the kids. And so my wife, following Pliny's natural history, she prepared a garlic soup, a very strong soup made with garlic and milk, boiled milk with garlic, very strong. I think she used five garlic bulbs, first roasted and then boiled with milk to make a really delicious soup, very powerful, very strong. And within 24 hours, they were all feeling better, and I never had any of the symptoms. And so you can see how, because we have a simple diet and we know what to expect of our bodies, and again, we live out in the country, so we're not surrounded by a million people, again, with unknown causes of problems, because we're not able to isolate causes. Out in the country, it's much simpler because there's nothing affecting our bodies unless we put something into them or something new enters into the environment, and we're pretty conscious when that happens. But we can see symptoms developing of some sickness or some disease, and we can know what the causes of those problems might be, because the causes in our life are so few and simple and observable. And we can then introduce a substance with known effects, and we can see that substance produce those known effects. And it's a very simple process. But the only reason we can even make use of these ancient works in natural philosophy and medicine is because of that simplicity being established first. So in order for us to get started with ancient natural philosophy, ancient nutrition and diet, ancient medicine, we have to commit to living a very simple life. We have to commit to controlling what goes into our bodies very carefully, and we have to know at all times what substances are in our bodies. We have to eat foods that are produced where we know all of the ingredients. Bread that's very simple. Soups where we know all of the contents of the soup. None of these modern complex dishes that are designed only to please the taste. That gluttonous style of eating has to be abandoned, and we have to go back to a simple, healthy style of eating. And what's healthy about it is that we know what the contents of our diet are. We're always able to observe the effects of those contents. And when a problem does arise, we can introduce a simple addition to our diet or a change in our diet to seek to bring about a desired effect. We have to commit to that simplicity of eating and drinking, or there's no way to observe what's going on in our bodies. And this is the problem I think that most modern people have, is that they are sick. So many people are sick. I can't even believe how many people I talk to who are sick. We have a family of 10. We have a family of 12. My wife and I and 10 children. And we have never had children in a doctor's office. Not because we just stay home sick, but because we're not sick. We may have some symptoms developing, usually because we go into town or mingle with some people who are in heavily populated areas, and we'll pick something up from those interactions. But we normally can deal with it, and the symptoms are alleviated, and we're back to health. I can't believe how many people I talk to have their lives almost entirely controlled by health problems. And modern men and women have to understand that that's not normal. That's not normal. We're not supposed to live like that. We're not supposed to be sick every week or 2 weeks with, sick stomachs and headaches and fatigue and vomiting and diarrhea and all these. We're not supposed to live like that. Something's wrong. If we're sick all the time, we can't even work regularly because half the time we're sick. We have to realize the negative effect that those conditions has on our lives over time, that we're not able to study or work or do good things because of these sicknesses, and life shouldn't be like that. Life shouldn't be like that. It's not normal. I mean, it may be normal in our society because our society isn't even conscious of how sick it is day by day. But this isn't the condition that humans are supposed to be living in. But these sicknesses can't even be diagnosed because there's just such a complex mess of substances present in everyone's body where there's no way to even identify a cause of the sickness. There's no way to know. People self-diagnose. Say, I'm lactose intolerant. I can't eat wheat. They don't even know. There's no way to even know if that's true. A few years ago, I ran a boarding school, and I had a number of students come to the boarding school, and they came with all of these nutritional problems. One was lactose intolerant. Another was so sick he couldn't eat at all. My wife had to specially make him meals because he couldn't eat anything without getting sick. And I simply don't believe that those situations are real. I believe that part of it is psychological, and part of it is that there's more going on in the person's life, and we're not getting the whole story. So the first thing that I say is, what kind of exercise, what kind of physical work do you get day by day? And often there's no physical work, no exercise. So there's very little circulation, breathing, sweating. The muscles aren't working. So many of the natural functions of the body are not being activated. And when that's true of us, we can't possibly affect that this body is going to be healthy when it's not doing the things that it was designed to do. So we have to introduce physical work because physical work is built into our nature. We can't be healthy as human beings without physical work. And so that's the first thing. I would get the boys active on the farm with daily chores and work and exercise to do. The other major cause of sickness is anxiety and stress, which is a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem because Jesus can say to us, or St. Paul, for example, can say, do not be anxious. If anxiety is an effect that we can't control, no one could say to us, do not be anxious. But the fact that we can be told not to be anxious means that it's in our control. It's in our power to not be anxious. And that's a second major cause of bad health. Not so much because the anxiety produces some kind of, chemical effect in us, but because anxiety and stress causes us to engage in so many other unnatural and harmful behaviors. So we have to have physical work. We cannot have souls riddled with anxiety. And thirdly, we have to simplify our diet. St. Benedict recommends 1 meal per day. And when I say that to people, they look at me like I'm crazy. And yet the people who will tell me that I'm crazy will turn around in the next conversation and talk about all their health problems. We shouldn't have all these health problems. And one of the reasons we do have all these health problems is because we consume too much. Our bodies are made so simple, their needs are so little, that God has designed us for good health. And yet the way we manage our bodies causes us to lose that health. And yet when you talk to someone about an alternative, even though their bodies are riddled with health problems, they'll look at you like you're crazy, even though you have none of those health problems. So when we go back to the rule of St. Benedict, which I think is really the foundation of any Christian philosophy of health or medicine, I think we have to go back to the rule of St. Benedict and follow its counsel in terms of eating and drinking. It's a bread-based diet, and bread does not mean white Wonder Bread or any kind of, enriched, soft breads that we're used to today. It means old-fashioned, simple whole wheat or other grain breads, homemade, hearty breads, simple recipes, the kind of bread that was made and used all through ancient and medieval times. And these are very easy to make. People had to make bread every day. So when you think about the fact that God intended for man to eat bread every day, it's obvious that it's sustainable and it can be made and eaten every day. But it should be a bread-based diet. And the other foods that are added should be seasonal, simple foods that are being produced in the garden, or at least if they're being purchased in a natural way where we're buying seasonal products from, let's say, a local farmer's market. We have to establish a simple diet like that. We have to introduce physical exercise. We have to free ourselves from anxiety. We have to simplify our diet. We need to listen to the counsel of St. Benedict. We need to start fasting And if we're going to eat, we need to eat one meal a day. And it's recommended that that meal be taken at midday because you shouldn't be going to bed with a full stomach. Your body should already be through digestion before you go to bed. You should eat as the ancients teach. You should make sure you get physical exercise, at least walking after you've eaten, to help with digestion and to help just by the physical movement of your body to help food move through your digestive system. And then when you go to bed, you should be going to bed with an empty stomach. And then waking up, seeking to break the fast, and then have your main meal at midday. The content of your food should be simple. You should be able to name the substances that you've consumed on any given day. If we establish this simplicity of life, then we can begin to read and understand and benefit from the writings of the ancient philosophers and physicians. And if we're not willing to do that, if we're not able to do that, then there's really nothing to talk about with ancient natural philosophy or medicine because it's simply not for the modern man with all of his troubles. It's for a simple person following a simple routine where individual substances can be adjusted to bring about the health of the body or to restore the health of the body. So to summarize this talk, to get started in natural philosophy and medicine, to get started, we need to begin fasting, moving to one meal per day, taken at midday, and we need to consume simple substances that we can identify every day and try to keep a healthy diet as simple, as consistent as possible day by day so that adjusting different substances or introducing new individual substances can be allowed to cause effects that we can observe. And when we get ourselves into that situation, these ancient writings will become useful to us. And if we don't have that kind of self-control, and if we don't establish that kind of culture in terms of health and nutrition and medicine and so on, these books are simply going to be useless to us because we've got such a mess of substances within us that this kind of careful discussion about individual substances and their effects is just a waste of time because we have no idea what the mixture is that's within us of all of the different things we've eaten and drunk over the course of it. We don't even know what's inside of us, and therefore it's impossible to talk reasonably about the effects of our diet. But if we make these simple improvements, then all of these ancient writings on natural philosophy and medicine will become helpful to us. So that's what's needed to get started in ancient natural philosophy and medicine. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or would like to get into this further, send those questions along because I'll use those questions to continue with additional talks and provide some primary source references to help for further study as well. I hope that's helpful. God bless.